and it's chapter 16. I should point out, I guess, that I'm not in the habit of secreting haunted objects on my person. I certainly don't have any other sinister artifacts stuffed down my socks, as George suggested. The necklace was a weird one-off for me. I'd seen it the previous afternoon as we'd got ready for the assignment by the willow tree. George had put it in the trophy shelf along with the other curios. It just lay there in its little protective case, sparkling dully behind the glass, and instead of leaving it, as any other ordinary person would have done, I picked up the case, hung it around my neck, and simply walked away. Explaining why I'd done it wasn't exactly easy, especially considering the state that we were all in after the fright. So it wasn't until after a very late breakfast the following day that I tried to give my reasons. I just wanted to keep the necklace close at hand, I said, not shoved in with all the other trophies. I think it's because of what happened when I touched it, when I got that psychic connection with Annie Ward. The sensations I'd experienced were her sensations. What I'd felt, she felt. I got a glimpse of being her. So there's a danger of your talent, Lockwood said abruptly. He was pale and serious that morning. He regarded me with narrow eyes. You're almost too sensitive. You get too close to them. No, don't get me wrong, I said. I'm not close to Annie Ward at all. I don't think she was a particularly nice person when alive, and she's certainly a cruel and dangerous ghost. But because of my touch, I do understand something of what she went through. I understand her pain, and that means I want justice for her now. I don't want her forgotten. You saw her lying in that chimney, Lockwood. You know what Blake did. So when I saw the necklace dumped in there with all the other trophies, it just seemed wrong to me. Until that man's punished and justice is properly done, I don't think we should discard her. I gave him a rueful smile. Don't tell me. That's basically a bit mad, isn't it? Yup, George said. You need to be careful, Lucy, Lockwood said, and his voice was flat and cold. Wicked ghosts aren't things to trifle with. You're keeping secrets again, and any agent who does that, endangering the rest of us. I'm not having anyone on my team that can't be trusted. You understand what I'm saying? I did understand. I looked away. However, he went on a slightly lighter note, by chance, it's worked out quite well. This necklace would probably have been stolen if it weren't for you. He had it in his hand as he spoke, the gold surface of the pendant glinting in the sun. We stood in the basement, beside the open garden door. Cool air drifted in, diluting the taint of decay left by the freed visitors in the night. The floor was littered with broken glass and plasm stains. George had been working on the trophy shelves, sorting through cases. He wore an apron with slightly lacy edges and his sleeves rolled up. Nothing else has been nicked, he said, which, if that guy was a normal thief working for the black market, is a little strange. There's some cracking pieces here. The pirate hand, for instance, or this lovely fibula. Lockwood shook his head. No, it's the necklace he wanted. It's too much of a coincidence otherwise. Someone needs it badly. Well, we know who that someone is, I said. Hugo Blake. George paused. Only one problem. He's currently locked up. He is in custody, Lockwood agreed. But that doesn't mean much. He's a wealthy man. He might easily have arranged the raid. But I must admit, I don't quite understand why the necklace is so important to him. That Latin inscription doesn't prove him guilty, does it? He hesitated. Unless... Unless? I said. The necklace contains another clue or secret that Blake didn't want to find out. Exactly. Let's look at in the daylight. We stepped outside into the little garden. Lockwood held the necklace up for us to inspect. It seemed exactly as before, an oval pendant, gold with pearly flakes, rather squashed and split along one side. I gazed at it. Split along the side? We're idiots, I gasped. It was staring at us in the face. Lockwood glanced at me. Meaning? Meaning it's supposed to have a split. It's a locket. It opens. We can open it. I took the pendant from him and pressed the corners of my thumbnails into the narrow crack. I prized it gently. Despite its distorted shape, there was an immediate, satisfying click. The pendant split in two, neatly swinging on its hinge. I pulled the halves apart and held them in my palm. I don't quite know what I expected, but I expected something. A twist of hair, maybe? A photograph? People keep things in lockets. That's what they're for. As one, we stared at the locket's open halves. There wasn't any hair or photograph, a keepsake or a tiny folder or folded letter. But that didn't mean the locket was empty. No, there was something in there. It was another inscription, neatly scorched into the smooth gold of the interior. A/W H.2.2.115. Here it is, Lockwood said, the hidden clue. This is what he wanted to hide. The A.W. is obviously Annabel Ward, I said, and the H is for Hugo. George breathed, as in Hugo Blake. Lockwood frowned. That's good as far as it goes. But there must be more. What about these numbers? Is this some kind of code? We'd better give this to DPRAC, I said suddenly. We can't hold on to it. This is serious evidence, which the police will need to see, and Blake knows it's here. You're probably right, Lockwood said, but I don't really want to come clean with Barnes. I'd rather we figured this out ourselves. Still, the phone rang shrilly in the office. Maybe we haven't got much choice. Answer that, would you, George? George departed and was gone some time. By the time he returned, Lockwood had returned the locket to its case, and I'd started sweeping the debris on the floor. Don't tell me, Lockwood said. Barnes again? George's features were slightly flushed. Actually, no, a new client. I assume it's some old lady with a ghost cat up a tree? Nope. And you might want to leave that, Lucy, and start tidying upstairs. That was Mr. John Fairfax, chairman of Fairfax Iron. He's coming over now. It was generally accepted that the problem affecting the British Isles was a bad thing for the economy. The dead returning to haunt the living, apparitions after dark, these things had consequences. Morale and productivity were low. No one wanted to work late shifts. In winter, businesses closed mid-afternoon, but some companies did flourish because they fulfilled a vital need. One of these was Fairfax Iron. Already a leading manufacturer of iron products when the crisis began, Fairfax Iron had immediately set about supplying seals, filings, and chains to the Fitz and Rotwell agencies. As the problem worsened and the government began to mass-produce ghost lamps, it was Fairfax Iron that provided the vast quantities of metal required. This alone secured the company's fortune, but of course there was more. Those ugly iron gnomes that people dotted around their gardens, those naff protecto necklaces, those little plastic bracelets with the smiley iron faces that they put on babies' wrists before they left the hospital. Fairfax products, every one. The company's owner, John William Fairfax, was in consequence one of the richest men in the country, up there with the silver barons and the heirs of Marissa Fitz and Tom Rotwell. And with that bloke who owns the great lavender farms on Lincolnshire Wolds. He lived somewhere in London, and when he snapped his fingers, the ministers of whichever government was currently in office scampered hot foot to his house. And now he was coming here, in person. You can be sure we tidied that living room double quick. A few minutes later, the purr of a large vehicle sounded out in the street. I peeped out to see a shiny Rolls idling to a halt. It seemed to fill the road and had polished silver-coated grills upon the windows and threads of silver tracing along the sides. On the bonnet, a small silver figurehead glinted in the warm winter sun. The chauffeur emerged, smoothing down his crisp grey uniform. He marched round the car to open the rear door. I ducked back inside, where Lockwood was frantically plumping cushions, and George brushed cake crumbs beneath the sofa. "He's here," I hissed. Lockwood took a deep breath. "Okay, let's try to make a good impression." We stood up when Mr. John Fairfax entered the room. Not that it made much difference. He was a very tall, thin man. He towered over me, over Lockwood, and George, trailing in his wake, was entirely in his shadow. Even at 70 or 80, or whatever age he'd got to, he was built on an impressive scale, like something you'd expect to launch down the slipway of Southampton docks. Yet his limbs were thin and wasted. The sleeves of his long silk jacket hung loose. His legs, despite the walking stick that supported him, trembled as he walked. My immediate impression of this particular mix of strength and weakness, uh, and in the room of 100 people, he would certainly have been impossible to ignore. "Good morning, sir," Lockwood was saying. "This is Lucy Carlyle, my associate." "Delighted." The voice was deep, but outstretched hand was vast and all-encompassing. A great square head, bald and liver-spotted, bent in my direction from on high. The nose was hooked, the black eyes bright and shining. The lines on the brow were heavy. When he smiled, and it was scarcely a smile at all, rather an acknowledgment of my existence, I saw that the teeth were capped with silver. It was a face used to exerting authority and command. "Pleased to meet you," I said. We sat. Our guest engulfed his chair. His walking stick was mahogany, with an iron handle shaped like a dog's head, a mastiff or bulldog maybe. He rested it against one great bent knee and spread his fingers on the seat arms. "It's an honour to have you here, sir," Lockwood said. "Would you like some tea?" Mr. Fairfax inclined his head and gave a rumble of assent. Pitkin's breakfast, if you have it. Tell your boy to bring some sugar too." "My boy? Yes. Off you go, George. Tea's all round, please." George, who had neglected to remove his apron, rotated his leg and exited the room, expressionless. "Now, Mr. Lockwood," John Fairfax said, "I'm a busy man, and you'll be wondering why I've called upon you unannounced on a Friday morning. We'll dispense with the small talk and get down to business. There was a haunting that's proving most troublesome to me. If you can help me with it, I'll make it worth your while." Lockwood nodded gravely. "Certainly, sir. We'd be glad to." Our visitor cast his gaze around the room. "A nice house you have. Excellent condition. Of New Guinean ghost wards, I see. Business going well?" "Tolerably, sir." "You lie like a politician, Mr. Lockwood," the old man said, smooth and effortless. "My mother, God rest her soul, and may she never walk at night, told me to speak plainly and honestly to all men. I followed her advice all my life. So come." He slapped his knee with his great flat palm. "We shall get on much better if we are open with each other. Your business is not going well. I read the papers. I know you are in financial difficulties, in particular following a certain incident with a house you managed to burn down." He chuckled, a dry reverberation. "You have a very hefty fine to pay." A muscle twitched in Lockwood's cheek. Otherwise he gave no sign of irritation. "That's correct, sir, although I am in the process of raising the money. We have plenty of other excellent cases, which give us a healthy income." Fairfax made a dismissive gesture. "Fibbing again, Mr. Lockwood. I should tell you I've contacts in Deeprack, and I've read your recent files. I know the extent and quality of those, quote, excellent cases. Grey hazes, cold maidens, gibbering mists, the weakest and most humdrum type ones imaginable. I'm surprised you earn enough to pay Miss Carlyle here." Which was a good point, come to think of it. I hadn't been paid for a month. Lockwood's eyes glinted. That being so, sir, I ask, why have you come to us today? Is there any other agencies in London? Indeed there are. Fairfax raised his tufted eyebrows and fixed us both with his black, beady stare. But it just so happens that your recent publicity surrounding that case drew my favourable attention. I was impressed by the way which you not only found the body of, he hesitated, what was the name of the girl? Annie Ward, sir. Of Annie Ward, but discovered her identity too. I like your punch, and I like the attention to detail. I also like your youth and independence of mind. The old man leaned forward on a stick. There was something new in his face, not warmth exactly, more like a fierce enthusiasm. I began as an outsider too, Mr. Lockwood. I struggled hard to make my way when I was a lad. I fought against big companies, new lean times. I understand the passion that drives you on each day. Besides, I've no interest in giving yet more money to Fitz or Rotwell. They're rich enough already. No, I propose to give you the opportunity you've never dreamed of. See if you can bring your powers to bear on a different, more dangerous puzzle. Ah, your fellow's back again. George had returned, carrying the tray, on which he'd assembled a tea service I'd never set eyes on before. It was all fine bone china and little pink flowers, and a kind of mincing cups that are so delicate and brittle you expect them to shatter whenever you put them to your lips. This classy effect was slightly undermined by a teetering pile of fat jam doughnuts on the plate beside them. Thanks, George, Lockwood said. Put them down here. Lockwood set the tray on the table and poured out the tea and offered doughnuts all round. Since no one took one, he prized the biggest of all from the bottom of the stack, fingering most of the others in the process, and plonked it on a plate, and sat next to me with a lingering sigh of gratification. Shove up, he said. So did I miss anything? The old man's eyes widened. Mr. Lockwood, this is an important consultation. Surely your lad should wait outside. He's not exactly an office boy, sir. This is George Cubbins. He works with me. Mr. Fairfax surprised George, who was busy licking jam off his fingers. I see. Well, in that case, I shall delay no longer. He put his hand inside his jacket and rummaged awkwardly within. Take a look at this. He threw a crumpled photograph onto the table. A house. No more than a mere house, or more than a mere house, in fact. It was a country mansion, set in extensive grounds. The photo had been taken from some distance across a stretch of attractively mown lawn. Willow trees and flower beds featured on the margins, and there was also a suggestion of a lake, and the house beyond dominated all, a tall, dark slab of several floors. You could see columns and sweeping entrance stairs, and a profusion of thin, irregularly positioned windows, but the precise age and nature of the building was hard to make out. The photo seemed to have been taken rather early, or rather very late. The sun was somewhere behind the building, and the long black shadows of its ancient chimneys stretched out like grasping fingers across the lawn. Combe Carry Hall, Fairfax said, rolling the syllables off his tongue, in Berkshire, just to the west of London. Have you heard of it? We shook our heads. None of us had. No? Well, it's not very well known, and yet it's possibly the most haunted private house in England. I believe it may well be the most deadly. To my certain knowledge, 4 previous owners of the estate have died there as a result of its apparitions. As for the numbers of servants, guests, or other folk who have been frightened to death, or ghost-touched, or otherwise, drawn to their doom across the house and grounds, he gave a small dry chuckle. Well, the list is extensive. In fact, the place was boarded up 30 years ago after some gruesome scandal of that kind, and not reopened until recently, when it came into my possession. You live there, sir? I asked. The domed head tilted. His dark eyes flashed at me. It was my only property, if that's what you mean. I visited from time to time. The place is very old in origin. It was a priory founded by a breakaway group of monks from one of the local abbeys. The stones at the heart of the west wing go back to that period. Subsequently, a series of local lords owned it, rebuilding and adapting the ruins before it converted into its current form around the turn of the 18th century. Architecturally, it is a peculiar mismatch of the place, passages leading nowhere or doubling back upon themselves, odd changes in level, but more to the point, it's always had a sinister reputation. Stories of visitors there go back centuries. In short, it was one of those sites where hauntings were already in evidence well before the start of the problem. It's said that. Is that someone looking out? George said suddenly. He had been studying the photograph closely while the old man talked, staring at it quizzically through his thick, round glasses. Now he picked it up and, with a chubby finger, indicated a point on the main wall of the house. Lockwood and I bent close, frowning. High above, to the left of the entrance uh, portico, a dark, triangular notch indicated the presence of a narrow window. It was a slight grey smudge inside of the notch, too faint to be seen. Ah, you've noticed that, have you? Fairfax said. Yes, it does look like a figure, doesn't it? Standing just inside. The curious thing is, this photograph was taken a couple of months before I inherited the estate. The house was shut and locked. No one was living there. He took a sip of tea, his black eyes twinkling. Again, I thought I detected amusement in his manner, as if he took a certain pleasure in that smudge and its implications. What time was the picture taken? I asked. Approaching dusk, the sun setting, as you can see. Throughout all this, Lockwood's face had been glowing with scarcely suppressed excitement. He had hunched forward, bony elbows balanced on his knees, hands pressed together with sinew tense and interest. You're about to tell us something of the phenomena, sir, he said. How they manifest, I mean. Mr. Fairfax placed his cup down on the table and sat back with a sigh. One great hand grasped his iron-headed walking stick, and the other gestured as he spoke. I am an old man. I cannot see apparitions myself, and, as a general rule, I don't sense 'em either. But the Malayan aura of my house is evident, even to me. I feel it the moment I walk through the door. I taste it in my mouth. Ah, it's a sickly atmosphere, Mr. Lockwood, which works to sap the soul. As for specifics, he leaned a little on the stick, adjusted his position slightly as if his bones hurt him. Well, there are many stories. The caretaker, Bert Starkins, is the one to ask about it. He seems to know them all, but certainly the two best tales in the neighbourhood, the key hauntings, if you will, concern the Red Room and the Screaming Staircase. There was a profound silence, abruptly broken by an enormous, loud rumble from George's stomach. Plaster didn't actually fall from the ceiling, but it was close. Sorry, he said cheerfully, famished. I think I'll have another donut, if you don't mind. Any takers? No one paid him any heed. He reached out for the plate. The Red Room, I said. The Screaming Staircase? Lockwood edged forward in his chair. Please, Mr. Fairfax, tell us more. I'm delighted to see you display such interest, the old man said. I can't see that my high opinion of you, or I can see my high opinion of you was correct. Well, the Red Room is a bedchamber on the first floor of the west wing of the house. At least it was used as a bedroom once. No longer. It's completely empty now. It's one of those places where the supernatural presence is so potent that it spells disaster to anyone who visits it. No one can spend the night there and live, or that's the story. Have you been in there, sir? Lockwood asked. I have peered in, by day, of course. And the atmosphere? Thick, Mr. Lockwood, thick and evil. The old head drew back. Fairfax looked down his great hooked nose at us, and I have good reason to believe that the power of this room, as I shall tell you presently. Then there's the screaming staircase. To me, it's the more mysterious tale. The stairs wind from the long gallery to the ground floor and up to the landing. They're made of stone and very ancient. I myself have never experienced any ill sensation on these stairs, and I don't know of anyone who has, but it's said that long ago they witnessed some great horror, and the souls of those involved were trapped within. At certain times, perhaps when the power of the visitors is at its height, perhaps that's when they sense the presence of a new victim, and you hear the frenzied howling. It emanates from the stairs somewhere. Lockwood spoke softly. The actual staircase screams? Apparently. I've never heard it. About the Red Room. George was finishing his donut. He paused and swallowed. You say it's on the first floor. Would that be on the same level as the window in this picture? Yes, I suppose it would be about there. Do you mind not spraying sugar on the photograph? I just don't have another copy. Sorry. This is fascinating, Lockwood said. From what you're saying, there's more than one visitor in the house, more than one source. A cluster of ghosts, in other words. You believe that to be true? Certainly, Fairfax said. I could feel them. Yes, but how did it begin? There must have been some key event, some central trauma that started it all. It begs the question, which visitor was first? Lockwood tapped his fingertips together. Is the house empty now? The west wing is certainly unoccupied, for that's where the danger is concentrated, my man. Starkins has been the caretaker for many years. He lives in an adjacent building. And where do you stay, sir, when you visit the property? Oh, I've a suite in the east wing, which is relatively modern and has its own entrance. It's separate from the main section of the house by iron doors on every floor. I installed them myself, along with the best defences money could buy, and my sleep has not been disturbed. The old man regarded us fixedly in turn. I am by no means a coward, and I would not for any consideration spend the night alone in the old wing of Carry Hall. However, he fingered the iron bulldog lovingly. That is precisely why I'm asking you to do. My heart jumped. I made some small adjustment to my skirt, but otherwise stood quite still. Lockwood's eyes were shining. George's were, as ever, expressionless. Slowly he took off his glasses and rubbed the lens on the front of his jumper. We waited. You would not be the first to make such an attempt, Fairfax went on. The same questions Mr. Lockwood has just articulated were the same questions Mr. Lockwood has just articulated was on the mind of every previous owner too. 30 years ago, he decided to investigate and hired a small team of the Fitz Agency, a youth, a girl, and their adult supervisor, to conduct the initial explorations. They agreed to spend the night in the house, focusing their attention on the so-called Red Room. Well, they followed standard procedures. The main door to the house was left unlocked, so they had a clear avenue of escape. They rigged up an internal telephone in the Red Room itself. This was connected to a phone in Bert Starkins' lodge, so that help, if necessary, might be summoned. They were all highly experienced operatives. The owner left them there at dusk. Some hours later, he went to bed. Starkins noticed torchlight moving steadily in the windows on the upper floors around midnight, and the caretaker's phone began to ring. He picked it up. It was the supervisor. He said that there'd been some odd phenomenon, and that he wished to check that the connection was working properly, but otherwise all was well. He was quite calm. He rang off, and Starkins went to bed. The phone did not ring again that night. In the morning, when Starkins and the owner met up on the front steps, the Fitz group had not emerged. After 7:30, they entered the hall, and the place was quiet. No one answered their calls. They knew where they had to go, of course, and when they opened the door of the Red Room, they found the body of the supervisor lying face down beside the telephone. He was ghost-touched and quite dead. The girl was on the far side of the room, crouched beside a window. I say crouched. She was so tightly curled up that they could not unbend her to check her face or check her pulse. Not that there was much point in that. She was stone dead too, of course. I'm sorry to say that they never discovered what happened to the boy. You mean they couldn't tell how he died? George asked. I mean they never found him. Excuse me, sir, Lockwood said, but when the man used the telephone at midnight, did he say what kind of phenomenon they'd been experiencing? No, he did not. Mr. Fairfax took out a pocket watch from his jacket and consulted it briefly. Time is passing. I need to be in Pimlico in 15 minutes. Very well. To the point. As I say, your agency has caught my eye. I'm surprised and intrigued by your capabilities. So here's my proposition. I'm prepared to pay the costs in the Sheen Road case. That'll settle the damages caused by the fire and keep Deepak quiet into the bargain. To earn your £60,000, all you have to do is commit yourself to the investigation. In fact, I'll wire you the sum in the account the moment I arrive, or the moment that you arrive at the hall. Additionally, if you succeed in uncovering its mysteries and locate the source within it, I shall pay you a further handsome fee. What is your standard charge? George named a figure. I shall pay twice that. Combe Carry, I can assure you, is not to be taken lightly. Mr. Fairfax grasped the bulldog's head and shuffled forward, preparing to rise. Another thing, when I require something, I act quickly. I would want you there in 2 days. 2 days? George said. But we need time to... Let me tell you at once, Fairfax said, that my proposal is not up for negotiation. You are not in a position to impose terms. Oh, and I have another stipulation. No flares or explosive devices must be brought into the hall, which contains a great deal of ancient and valuable furniture. It's not that I don't trust you, but forgive me. The silver-capped teeth glittered. I don't want my property burned down. Squeaks of protest from the chair. He stood, towering over us on his brittle limbs, like some giant insect. Very well. I don't expect a decision from you now, of course. Let me know by the end of the day. You'll find my secretary's number on this card. I sat back in the sofa, blowing out my cheeks. Too right he wouldn't get an immediate decision. Fitz's agents were the best, we all knew that, and 3 of them had died in Cumcarry Hall. To follow them in, without proper time for proper preparation, would be bordering on madness. The Red Room, the screaming staircase. Yes, the money Fairfax was offering might save the company, but what good would that do if we lost our lives? There was no doubt about it. We needed to debate this very carefully. Thank you so very much, sir, Lockwood was saying, but I can give you our answer right now. We will definitely take the case. He stood up and held out his hand. We'll make arrangements to be down at the hall as soon as possible. Shall we say Sunday afternoon? And that's the end of chapter 16 and the end of part 3. And with that, there's only part 4 left. As promised, I won't be reading it. I can't for copyright reasons read the entire book, but let me tell you, the screaming staircase, and if you enjoyed that chapter there, listening to, oh, what happened to those agents and oh, what could be in the house, it is an absolutely corking bit of book. I remember the first time I read that, I was on the train on the way home, and I was just, there's a bit where phenomenon starts appearing, and I don't think I looked up until I got to my station. I was just buried in this book, reading it to the end. It is an absolutely fantastic ending to the book, worth buying the book to read. Please do. Um, we'll do another Lockwood, sure. There's, I think I've got the whole series, unless he's written any more. Um, so we'll go through them. We'll do the next one. Can I see it from here? No, the Empty Graves. I think the last one. There's others though. All very enjoyable. Um, so some of them are. There's one in particular that's got rats in it, ghost rats, and what's quite funny is that my book itself is quite rodent nibbled because I was reading it in the room with Nimbus, and he likes to come up and investigate, and you don't get any warning with chinchillas that they're going to nibble something. You're reading it, and then they're right there, and their entire mouth is around the book, and you've already lost a chunk of it. So it's it looks genuine. So anyone who gets the book next is going to be like, there's actual teeth marks in this whenever they're reading it, so it's going to be proper spooky. But I'll see. No, I'll upload this on Monday, and I'm gonna do Stephen King next. Thanks for listening.